Welcome to Three, a show about Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, and part of the Tennis Channel podcast network. I'm Gill with Joel Drucker and Amy Lundy. It is time to preview Wimbledon 2022. Nadal and Djokovic are playing. They are on opposite halves of the draw this time, so we will not have a repeat of the very strange and debatably unfortunate situation that we had a month ago at Roland Garros, where they played in the quarterfinal. Novak Djokovic is the one seed. I want to start with him. And Joel, this Wimbledon feels particularly important for Novak, given what this season has been for him. Whereas I think with Nadal, you could make an argument that it's kind of like house money. Okay, I haven't played this event in a couple of years. I've won the first two majors of the year. We'll see what happens. Whereas for Djokovic, defending champion, now down two in the slam count, it feels very important.
I think mostly it's the moment of Wimbledon itself and a major. And Novak hasn't won a major this year. He hasn't lost at Wimbledon in 5 years. I mean, it's interesting how last September, we were looking at him possibly winning a calendar slam. And then he lost at the US Open. He wasn't able to play Australia. He lost at Roland Garros. So yeah, there's definitely some urgency he's bringing to this. I think it's less concerned about the slam tally and much as his own personal desire to win this tournament for a 7th time and for the 4th year in a row.
He is in an interesting headspace right now, and I would love to see him get back to a little bit into 4th or 5th gear. The interesting thing about this draw is, as you mentioned, Gill, it's kind of a relief that the Nadal and Djokovic are on opposite ends. The draw to me feels balanced. I actually really, you guys know, like I call them like I see them. I like Novak's draw for Novak. I won't use the word easy, but I like Novak's draw better than Rafa's draw for Rafa. And yeah, it is important to him. He wants to get back to his winning ways, and it's a real mystery. We're at a pivotal turning point. We don't know what's going to happen next with him, but he is the defending champion.
Not only is he the defending champion, he's the 3-time reigning defending champion. Obviously, there was the interruption with Wimbledon not being played in 2020. He's won 4 out of the last 6 Wimbledons. I think he's separated himself on the surface in recent years. And, Roger was right there in 2019 after Federer beat Nadal in the semifinal. But we've come into a lot of Wimbledons, at least I have, thinking, or feeling like Djokovic is a pretty crystal clear favorite, whereas, maybe the list of contenders feels a little bit heavier or weightier on hard court, and then obviously on clay is a whole nother story, with Nadal generally being the favorite coming into Paris. So I guess what's the first thing that you would highlight to explain Djokovic's Wimbledon dominance, Amy?
The serve would be his improved acumen on the serve. But also just his ability to break down that particular opponent. I think to win, the epic when he beat Rafa. What year was that? 2018?
Yeah.
Yeah. It took a certain type of mentality that he hadn't faced earlier to that point in the tournament. And so it's more like opponent specific scouting that he's done a really good job with, because grass is such a mixed bag. I mean, you get like clay court specialists that are seated high. You get young guys who don't have a lot of grass experience. They're unproven on the surface, but they're unproven on the surface. Maybe they begin to emerge as a really good grass court player. So Wimbledon is such a mixed bag, and with each round, you don't know what you're going to get, that I think Novak has done an amazing job of opponent specific, tailored game plan, and the improved serve as well.
My thought is it's Novak's his balance, his posture. I think the grass surface really tests the lower body of a player, and I think his fitness and flexibility and agility in that way help him sustain himself through round after round. I mean, I think that was very apparent in the Federer final he won in 2019. How Novak's ability to engage in that airtight, it's one thing to say, when I play tiebreakers, I'm not going to miss. It's another thing to actually have the tools that allow you to do that, to maintain the posture and the balance and the depth. I mean, this isn't a 14 and under event where you just decide I'm going to keep the ball in play. This is the highest levels of the game. And I think Novak really has his, I'm really impressed to see to watch his balance. I mean, this guy, he's won this 6 times. He win this year. He'll win it as often as Pete Sampras did. And it's a different kind of playing style. And so it's very impressive.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Joel. I feel like from a movement perspective, it's not particularly close. Like Djokovic moves the best on grass because of the way he kind of conquers the surface from a sliding perspective. I find that a lot of players feel like they have to walk on eggshells a little bit when they get on the grass because it's a slick surface. We see slips. I think conventional wisdom suggests that you have to take more, smaller steps on grass to kind of soften your changes of direction because you don't have that traction. I feel like Djokovic is just like, you throw that out the window. He moves like he's playing on clay. And I think it's the balance and the strengths of the ankles and the legs that enable him to do that. So I agree with that. And then the other thing for me is the fast court returning, the same edge that I think Andy Murray had on grass. I feel like obviously it's a server's surface. And there are a lot of players like what we might see with Matteo Berrettini as a contender, Hubert Hurkacz as a contender, who serve incredibly big. They might get very few opponents who can actually return their serve enough to break serve at an acceptable rate. And then there are just a couple of guys, and we're talking about maybe 2-3 guys who return well enough to actually make them play. And Djokovic is always in that group of players who he's not going to be daunted by a massive elite serve, even on grass.
I think also Novak, I think this might be the year where we begin to crystallize his grass court genius, because so many of these Wimbledons that he's won, there's been the Federer storyline, the eternal genius of Roger, wondering about Nadal, other contenders, and Novak a few years ago kind of slipped down the radar around 2017. But now we start to see, wait a second, look at this guy, look how well he does. And I think some of his fundamentals, the way he was trained, the way he was taught, really surfaces on the grass, because that healthy aspect is so important on this surface. I mean, you're right, you get those twists, you get those groin pulls, you get all these things. And so his road work, just like in the same way that Nadal's road work helps him on clay, we see that all the discipline Rafa puts to being great on clay. I think in some ways you see even more with Novak on grass than let's say his natural hard court. I mean, it's very clear in Australia, but then everybody's got some of that going in Australia. But grass, it really starts to stand out.
Well, let's not overlook the obvious that Novak plays well on fast courts. I mean, that's just sort of in his DNA. He also plays well on slow courts like clay, but this is where he really emerges as elite. You guys were talking about like who can return, like Novak is in that group, who can move well on this surface. And there's one name that keeps coming up in my head, and that name is Rafa Nadal. I don't want to skip ahead, but I just watched some highlights of him 2019 versus Querrey at Wimbledon, because Querrey is in his little section. I think they could meet in the second round. I was just stunned at how beautifully Rafa was moving on the surface. And it's a reminder that this guy can also contend.
Totally. And I think with Nadal, though, it's movement to get to the ball, to track to the ball. I think Nadal strikes me as foot speed and coverage and getting there and tracking things. And certainly he can return well. I think of Novak, it's footwork. It's the discipline of moving around the ball, not just getting to the ball, but how he organizes his feet and his technique. I mean, look, we're talking about two guys who've won multiple Wimbledon titles, but I think it's a little different how they each do it.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at Djokovic's draw, Alcaraz is the top seed opposite Novak. Then you have names like Sinner, Opelka, Isner, Basilashvili, and Kecmanovic as some lower seeds in the quarter. Two unseeded players that catch my eye. I mean, mostly Andy Murray is the name that everyone will be circling. But I will say James Duckworth, Andy Murray's first round opponent, is someone, when healthy, who's been really good at Wimbledon. I think he at least made the third round last year, maybe the fourth, and he's kind of a grass court specialist out of Australia. So that's one to watch, in my opinion. Joel, I guess, look, I think it's most important, as we've seen, is not, who's the second round, who's the third round, but who's the quarterfinal. I mean, that's generally what's more important. I mean, what do you make of Alcaraz, Joel, coming into Wimbledon?
Alcaraz is kind of interesting. He's gonna, this is his Wimbledon now he's on the radar. Now we've seen him, and he had a reasonable go at Roland Garros. And he's gonna play. He's gonna play our old friend Struff.
Yeah.
And the least seeded
who's a good grass court player, by the way.
Who's kind of dangerous. I think the way it works for a young hopeful contender, grass has its other form of humbling. Clay has the humbling for the contender of, oh my, these long points, particularly for someone who hasn't played on clay as much. But then Alcaraz is going to be playing someone like Struff. There are going to be numerous points where the racket's going to be taken out of his hands, just because of the grass and the kind of opponents. So I'm intrigued to see how Alcaraz handles that. Kick serve, not always as significant on grass as it is on other surfaces.
Right.
So I think in time he'll be fine, but I think it's going to be intriguing. I wouldn't be surprised if that opening match is a 4-setter with a guy like Struff. I could see a 5-7 in there, where suddenly, I mean, Wimbledon, things happen so quickly that shift a set. And, a guy takes a couple good cracks, and next he breaks serve. So I don't know. It'll also be just fun to see Alcaraz, to see the joy he brings to competition, bringing it to the All England Club.
I think we have to be careful not to peg Alcaraz too early as somebody who is a clay court guy or a slow hard court guy who can't contend on grass. I mean, I see him more as an all surface player. I was looking at some of his serve statistics, and it's funny, I was Googling and one of my own articles came up and I didn't even remember the stuff that I had written about his serve. But he has really good power. He just doesn't necessarily always use it. So his max speeds can get up in the high 130s, but his average speeds are around the 120s. So that lets me know that he's capable of pumping it up. It's just not the norm for him.
The power's never been the problem, though. It's really the spots that.
Yes. And I mean, I could be speaking out of turn here, but I think that as you get older, typically the spot serving gets better.
Agree.
So I think what I'm trying to say in all this is don't sell Alcaraz short this tournament. He could be a major contender. This first round match is going to tell us a lot, totally. But after that, he's in decent shape. And in terms of Andy Murray, he's been hurt. So I would have said 2 weeks ago that he was a dangerous floater, but we just don't know. And then I looked up Kecmanovic and Basilashvili, and their grass court records are just so. I don't think anybody's above 500 on grass. So it's a good opportunity for Novak.
I think with the surface thing, I think for a player like Alcaraz, I think we're past the days of top 10 players having significant surface specialty. A player in the top 10 is, that doesn't mean some will do better than others. Like we've talked about Tsitsipas, and maybe he's got to adjust. But if you're in the top 10, you're pretty much fine on all surfaces, because all surfaces are pretty much fine for you too. I mean, grass is slower, clay's faster. So we're no longer in I used to call it the sphere of influence era, where you had your Moosters and your Brugueras on clay, your Richard Krajiceks and Goran Ivic's on grass, and they could have top 10 careers while doing that. But see, the game is such now, the surfaces are much more homogeneous than they used to be. I always bring up the 32 seeds as a certain kind of performance enhancement that aids things. So I don't count him out. I don't count him in yet. I mean, he's going to eventually do great at Wimbledon, I think. But this is a little bit of his starting period at Wimbledon, and just adjusting to all sorts of things, from the eyeballs to playing on show courts to opponents. And even though it's still slower, it's still grass.
Yeah. I mean, look, it'll be his third ever grass court match against Struff. I mean, that doesn't count. I'm not counting the juniors, and I'm sure has experience maybe growing up. But as far as professional senior tour matches go, it'll be his third ever when he plays Struff. So that's the mystery. That's the question mark. And as Joel mentioned, there are things to get used to. But ultimately, I agree with what you said, Amy. It's insane to pin him as like a clay courter right now, when first of all, his results on hard court were right there. And like, here's an ultra offensively minded player. Like, why couldn't that be great on grass? You don't think so, Joel?
No. I absolutely do think so. Who show me the person who the thing called him a clay courter, and I think that's complete idiocy. No, I think he's a total contender on grass, particularly the way tennis is played these days. That's my point. I think this is not 1983, and he's a dirt baller with a Western. He's an all-court player, and we saw that in this whole run through hard courts and clay. He knows he's got as complete a game as any teenager I've ever seen.
Yeah. Okay. First round, we always like to give it a shout out. I actually haven't looked at any head-to-heads or anything, but Soonwoo Kwon, he's a great ball striker. Like, he hits, he's got a good backhand. He hits the ball really well. But he's one of those like smaller players who isn't all that quick. So, it feels like he's got a ton of racket talent, a ton of arm talent, but just the athleticism, the body isn't there to really become a top 30 player. Any thoughts, Joel, on what we could expect to see from Kwon Djokovic in round one?
They played in 2021 in Belgrade. Novak beat him 6-1, 6-3. I think we're going to see a great many rallies, and it's going to be sometimes what I call a compensated practice session. I mean, that's how I see it kind of going. I mean, there's
going to be a lot of pace. I think the rallies are going to be very fast paced. Kwon doesn't really back up off the baseline. Neither does Novak. I think they'll enjoy going backhand to backhand, and
Novak will say. And so then the thing for Kwon, and this is where you see the summit of a player's learning development, and this is just how it kind of goes in tennis. It's like, what's he going to innovate? Because he's going to go backhand to backhand with Novak. Yeah, right. You have that all day, buddy. But the neat thing is, now, over the last 20 years, since the grass has gotten slower, it'll be fun to watch. There'll be nice rallies, and there'll be some exertion, and there'll be a moment where Kwon, they'll be in a cross-court rally, and Kwon will redirect a forehand down the line. It'll be an untouchable winner, and they'll get the applause of center court, and it'll feel tremendous. And then Novak will go, okay, back to business.
Yeah, barring some highly unusual turn of events, I don't even think it'll be that fun to watch, to be honest. I mean, there's some really interesting first round matches in the men's draw, like that Murray match, Duckworth, that one of you guys mentioned, Sinner, Wawrinka. This one, I'll have to, make time to watch it. And I anticipate it'll probably go quick. I'm actually a little more interested in the Kokkinakis potential matchup
Yeah.
in the next round, and Jera, who, as we know, had a very interesting match against Novak this year. So I have to admit, I'm kind of looking past the first round already.
Fair. I think Kokkinakis will beat Jera. I'll just throw that out there.
Okay.
But we'll see. Let's go to Rafa Nadal. Nadal on the bottom half as the number 2 seed. It's such an interesting Wimbledon history for Rafa. There have been 3 parts to his career, I feel. He made the final every year he played from 2006 to 2011, and twice he won it. In 2008, one of the most significant matches of his entire career, beating Federer in the final, and he won it again in 2010. Then he went through a stretch in time where, unlike we've really ever seen at a major from Nadal, he kept getting upset early. He lost. He took a loss to Dustin Brown. He took a loss to Lucas Rosol. He took a loss to Gilles Muller in round 4 in 2017. I always forget. I always forget the name of the Belgian player who beat him. Does anyone remember?
Steve Darcy.
Yeah, Steve Darcy. Okay, so that was no quarterfinals from 2012 to 2017. That was kind of, there were reasons for it, but we haven't seen anything like that. Now, the last 2 years Nadal has played Wimbledon have to go back to 2018 and 2019. In 18, he made the semifinal and played an epic against Djokovic. It was 10-8 in the 5th, and if Nadal had won that match, which he was, of course, very close to doing, he probably would have won Wimbledon in 2018. He would have been the heavy favorite against Kevin Anderson in the final. Then in 2019, I'd say got handled pretty comfortably by Roger Federer in the semifinal. Federer being in top form at that year's Wimbledon. So with all of that Nadal Wimbledon history, I mean, Joel, where does that leave us in 2022?
Wow, it's funny. Rafa never makes it easy for anyone, whether his opponents or his chroniclers. It's like that was a whole little saga about Rafa Wimbledon, and it's kind of funny, and we were wondering a few weeks ago if Rafa was going to play Wimbledon, but then he won Roland Garros and he's won the Australian, and now here he is. It's kind of like yet a new day, and based on what I've come to understand about Nadal, all the stuff that we've recited and that we know, I mean, I love that explanation of his Wimbledon journey. He doesn't care about it all. It's like, here he is now. What's my next match? What's my next point? And I'm excited to see him at Wimbledon this year. It's funny. I kind of like his draw. I think his draw is pretty good, pretty open. But then he's going to work. He's going to never underestimate a single opponent. And I guess my concern most of all with Nadal, health. What goes on with the foot? How the foot is throughout the fortnight. That's what I care most about, and see that that's going to be okay. He said how he doesn't want to have the injections, and so what's that going to mean? What's the status of the foot? That's where I see it.
I definitely think that this quarter is the most interesting of the entire draw. I was looking up some of the records of okay, so Nadal's got Cilic in his quarter. Marin's record on grass is 80-32. Not only is that a stellar record, it's just so much more experience than a lot of these young guys in this tournament. FAA record on grass, 22-8. Phenomenal. Both these guys are in Rafa's quarter. Querrey is a good grass court player, but as I mentioned earlier, I went back and watched that 2019 was it quarterfinal?
Yeah.
Quarterfinal. And Querrey had previously made a semifinal, but Rafa handled him just so, not easily, but just it was like a masterwork kind of thing. It was used the slice a lot on the backhand side, came forward a lot, was doing his flicks and his defense. And I looked at his return position, which is always interesting because he really can't stand that far back at Wimbledon. So it was a nice medium return position. It wasn't right up close to the baseline, but it wasn't back in Timbuktu. I mean, the guy can play on grass. He knows what to do. But this draw, back to my earlier point, this draw is the most sort of fraught and interesting. He's got some good servers like Fritz in this quarter. And then he's got players like the young guy Runa, and then he's got Dan Evans. So and then Jack Sock, who qualified for Wimbledon, great server, has won a doubles title there. All these guys are in Rafa's quarter, so it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, I agree that it's a very interesting quarter with a lot of players who are worth a lot of respect, I think, coming into this Wimbledon. Sam Querrey, Joel, is probably the best counter argument that there are no grass court specialists anymore, because I did a calculation I was calling a Querrey match, and I did a calculation of his rankings coming into the grass court season, and 85% of his points were grass court points.
Wow.
This is exactly my point. See, it's funny. It used to be there were fast court, grass court, all court players, and clay court specialists. And clay was considered kind of the niche. I think the game is now, the tennis is about clay court, hard court, baseline prowess. That's the game. And actually, there are fast court specialists. So just in the same way that once upon a time, someone like Mooster was a clay courter, Querrey is a fast courter. And that's right. So there you go. That study you did of his point gathering, yeah, he's a grass court specialist. So that makes him dangerous, and obviously particularly because of his serve.
And yet Rafa made mincemeat of him.
Well, right. So that
it's just that's why we do this show, folks.
Right.
Like,
but here's the thing. Like you look at I can say big four history here, because Murray was right there in terms of by this metric. How often does the dangerous floater actually take out one of these guys?
Well, that's why they're a floater. I mean, in a way, it's like a floater is not a winner, so a floater can stir things up. It reminds me of a term a player said to once. He was talking about certain players. He goes, "This guy, we call these kind of guys stoppers. They stop the people from winning the tournament who should win the tournament sometimes, but they don't win the tournament.
Then they stop themselves, which would be curious, right?
And then they get beaten, and then they get beaten and things, and that's why they're floaters, and that's the way it kind of goes. And so with Nadal, I was going to ask you guys, what's the style besides serving well? Obviously serving well. What else does someone do to beat Nadal on grass?
I mean,
who would you map that?
Dead silence.
Dead silence.
I'll tell you what I'll give that player. I want that player to have a Del Potro Kyrgios extraordinarily dynamic forehand.
So I guess what I'll say, like, you need
one
to
thing
keep him
came
defending.
to mind for me. Go ahead, Gill. One thing just immediately popped into my mind, but go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think, pace absorption, the returning of very big serves on grass, and you have to make Nadal defend and to try to absorb pace on grass, because it's not. I'd say, like, on clay, that seems very impossible to beat Nadal that way, and on grass, I think we have seen it done.
Well, no, look at those upset guys. And it's funny, I was strolling through the qualifying draw and I saw Lucas Rosal, and I thought, wow, here's this guy. Wait, what happened? I beat Nadal at Wimbledon, and now here I am back in the qualifying, and Nadal is 36 and he's won the first two majors of the year. I mean, yeah, those Wimbledon losses Nadal had in those years were kind of revelatory and kind of strange. It's like he won the French, and there he was at Wimbledon. He's knocked off, and then like Nadal, though, you see how much more offense he's added to his game in recent years to not be pinned on his heels. So yeah, mapping out. I mean, again, the guy who beats Nadal is the guy who's having a great forehand day. Whether it was Robin Soderling at Roland Garros in 2009, whether it's a Kyrgios. I mean, serve, forehand, a big +1 kind of day.
I think Dustin Brown served and volleyed a lot, if I remember
Yes.
that match.
Yep.
The first thing that popped into my head is something a little unconventional. I think you disrupt Rafa's rhythm as best you can between the points, because if Rafa doesn't get his time and his, and he doesn't get into his, routines, he can find that very disruptive. So I would actually consider serving a little faster. And Roger is a fast between the point kind of guy, especially on his serve. And he's had success against Rafa. Other than that, I would try to force him to, like Joel said, defend and get into that mode where he's relying on his wits, and then just pray.
So you're resorting to gamesmanship.
Not gamesmanship. You're allowed, just like Rafa takes his time and does his on server's pace, you are also allowed, if you're more comfortable, to quicken the pace on your serve. You're well within your rights to do that. How you manage your time between the points can be critical.
Yeah, I was kind of just joking, but it's a little bit less. It's an unconventional plan as opposed to when compared to like attack the backhand or something like that.
Right, but it was the first thing that popped into my head, so I had to kind of let that out.
Yeah.
My recollection of the 2011 Wimbledon final where Novak beat Rafa is that Novak was kind of flatter, more penetrating, court space. I think on grass, court positioning is really important, because even if it's more managed grass than it used to be, more, slower and a little less prone to bad bounces, it's still grass bounces. So that's why one of the things I think makes Novak so great on grass is, again, his footwork, posture, and his compact strokes. The way he's able to address the ball early. It reminds me, in his way, of an Agassi, or even you go way back to a Connors, that kind of balance and ability to kind of, and not just absorb and redirect, but to direct, to take away time and, press people.
And that's why it's essential that on grass, Nadal flattens out the forehand.
That's right.
Especially if he's playing Djokovic, he needs to go down the line very, very often with the forehand, which I actually think he did in that 2018 semifinal. And he just got outserved in that match so significantly that I think that ultimately did him in. But I think from the baseline, he had the right idea against Novak in that match.
That was a tremendous match. He played over 2 days, and I was at that match, and I remember it started after the epic Isner Kevin Anderson. Well, the mini epic for Isner was only 26-24, and the quality of the tennis was just great with Novak and Rafa. But I think you're absolutely right, Gill, that down the line forehand, because the cross court exchange that Nadal so enjoys on clay with the high bounce, it's like, Novak, okay, you want to do that? Okay, we're okay.
Yeah.
It's so funny how, though, Nadal still uses it. He still uses the heavy topspin forehand on grass some.
Well, it's his technique. I mean, he's no able to discard that than like Novak's fairly flat. I mean, these are the things, and it's like, I know for all the talk about adjusting and different things, but when you're in the top 3 in the world for 15 years, the other folks are the ones being forced to do the adjusting.
Yeah, and if you can do that accurately, I mean, a topspin forehand shot is just not about how much the ball tops. I mean, the court also is worked from side to side as well. So if you have the accuracy that Nadal has, then it's definitely part of your arsenal on any surface.
I'd be curious. I wonder what some of the chats are in the Nadal camp about, okay, how do we go about Wimbledon this year? I mean, and how we how points are built and the sequences. And I know there's a, Novak, there's been some more known about the Novak approach to points and strategy. And I mean, we've had talks with our colleague Craig O'Shaughnessy. It's a little more of a vault with Rafa about what that is. I mean, we see it.
Yeah.
What goes, we don't know as much about the behind the scenes dialogue.
With return position, I think Moya helped him a lot, because I think Tony was killing him, honestly, with the return position. Tony was like, you have to stand on the baseline. And Nadal was coming from Roland Garros, where he was returning from the back fence. And then he's standing on the baseline against Lucas Rusal's 130-mile-per-hour first serves and looked completely uncomfortable. And I think Moya has allowed him to, or encouraged him to, find the middle ground and, give himself a little bit of time and stand back, to an extent. And I think that's really helped him. So I have observed that in recent years.
Maybe that's why we're a little intrigued to see a potential Felix Rafa quarter yet again, to add it, and the Tony influence, and Tony knows about Rafa. That's a nice little plot line.
Felix, by the way, has a tough first round match. He's got a serve and volleyer in Cressy. That's a little unfortunate for Cressy, because he's someone who could make waves, with a few wins at Wimbledon, and then he gets FAA in the first round.
He'll embrace that, though. Like, if he's on center court and he's the underdog, he's got an interesting personality where he thinks he's going to be number one in the world. And again, I'm not hating. Like, it's awesome. I like it. But he'll enjoy it.
You're talking about Cressy. That match, I doubt that match will be played on center court. I doubt that match will be played.
Really?
Because it's going to be that's going to be Wednesday, and Nadal is going to play at least one match on center court. And then let's look at that half of the draw. We've got other people. We've got last year's finalist Berrettini. I got Fritz and Musetti. I mean, I just have a hard time seeing that they're going to put.
That's a good point, Joel. You've sold me on that, because who is Cressy?
We have women's matches. Felix, you'll have your time for center court a little bit later. I mean, I haven't looked through the draw. Oh, we have Dan Evans. I mean, there's a number of factors that go into the All England center court assignment. You got 3 matches on center court. Yeah, no, you're right. One's Nadal, one's a women's match.
For sure.
Maybe 2 are women's matches. Maybe, I haven't quite clarified.
And potentially Berrettini.
Potentially Serena Williams.
Yeah.
Okay.
Joel, you could run the tournament.
Yeah. He basically does. Before we move on, and we're going to end this conversation with just talking about the effect of the points situation. Joel will plead the fifth on this, I believe, but Amy, I will put you on the spot. You can also plead the fifth. Nadal Berrettini tomorrow. They play tomorrow. Who's the favorite?
You're saying hypothetically, if they were to play,
what's your, because with
Djokovic, you really are putting me on the spot.
Djokovic, I'll just say, I'll give you time to think. Djokovic is kind of a consensus favorite. I think I don't think anyone would really argue with that right now. I think you would get some arguments when it comes to that number 2 spot. Is it Nadal, or might it be someone who has, from a record standpoint, absolutely dominated the grass, like Matteo Berrettini, or to a lesser extent, if you really don't believe in Nadal, then you might make an argument for a Hurkacz or a Felix.
Well, I mean, I was just going to say, both Berrettini and Rafa have been hurt. Berrettini's coming off of his hand surgery, and I did see him in the Queen, even though he won Queens, I did see him doing like this in some of the changeovers. And then of course we have Rafa's foot. So that's a tough one to call, but I'm actually going to have to write a preview pretty soon and look at that. I never bet against Rafa. You guys know that.
So what are you going to do when he plays Novak finals? Yeah, but you don't bet. You also don't bet. Okay, all right. So, it's our show. So
I'll plead the fifth from here on out.
Okay, I'll answer, Gill. I thought about this. I'm glad you gave me some space, because I think there are 3 things. There's the market, there's the desire, there's the prediction, right? It kind of splits into three.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I could see the marketplace. I mean, that's why I kind of at one level despise the marketplace of things. So I could see the marketplace based on results and the health giving the slight, the slight favorite edge to Berrettini. Okay, fine. He's been doing well on grass. Nadal, what's with the injury? So the analytical thing says that. My desire would be to see a good match, and I don't care. And then the prediction is, I don't know. Who do you think? I think this stuff and I see this also on social media, gets so balanced between the deployment of emotion to justify intellect and intellect to justify emotion. So enough. I don't know. I think I just want, most of all, if they play, I want it to be a really good match. I mean, I was so impressed by Berrettini. I'm so glad to see him back fully healthy and playing well. So there aren't slips, there aren't ankles, there aren't groins. There he is. He's right in there. So there you go. You're right, Gill. So that's my clever way of pleading the fifth.
Okay.
What
I
about
like Nadal.
you?
Me,
You like
Nadal.
Nadal?
Nadal,
Okay.
Nadal, yeah.
Okay.
Berrettini,
We're doing a show on Nadal. We like Nadal.
well, no, but seriously, I mean, I would say, like, if that match happened tomorrow and I like Berrettini, I would obviously say it. But no, I actually think that I think Nadal is a tier above and I don't think grass changes that. And look, Matteo, for as good as he's been,
He has the weakness, and Nadal knows how
right.
to exploit it.
Yeah, like what we saw the matchup in Australia and how predictable and kind of the way that match went. Berrettini's lost his last 10 matches against top 10 players. So I mean, there's a legitimate issue with Berrettini when it comes to winning off the ground. I think winning from the baseline against all great players. And I fully think Nadal's return is at a level where Berrettini can't coast on his serve like he can against most of the field. So I'll just leave it at that. And let's go to the points question. There will be none. Djokovic will drop in the rankings significantly after this event. Wherever the conversation goes, it goes. But for this Wimbledon specifically, Joel, for Wimbledon 2022, do you think we'll see any effect on the players when it comes to their psyche and their ability to compete at this event like it's any other ordinary year?
I've come to play the most important tournament in the world, and that's what matters. And the other thing I've also come to see about tennis players, all the external factors, they just like to compete. They want to compete, and there they are playing tennis matches, and here they're competing at the most important event in the world. They're aware of this thing about points, but that's not really in their head. So I think they're going to play pretty darn good. And then, of course, if a player loses earlier than that player desires, whether they're a seed who loses in the second round or et cetera, then they can kind of rationalize it and feel okay about it subsequently. But in the moment, they will compete, just like they do in practice matches and in tournament matches. I think it's going to be, but it will be interesting. And I think down the road, it's going to make the year-end rankings a little peculiar. I mean, that's what's going to be strange. It's going to remind me, there have been years like this way back in tennis where the slams weren't weighted as much. And sometimes the person who finished the year number one hadn't won a slam. The person who'd won multiple slams was ranked number two. And so there's going to be some odd ways in which we look at this year.
I feel separately about the points situation than I do, and the points being withheld from Wimbledon, than I do about Novak's situation in particular. I just don't think that when you get right down to it, Novak cares that much about ranking points or whether he's 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the world. I think what he wants is Grand Slams. And so whether he finishes year-end number one, or I just don't think it matters. And I know it matters
anymore, right?
anymore.
Because
He's got
he
all
has
those records.
he has the records.
He's blown by them. I mean, and he could again if he wanted to. He could play a bunch of tournaments that he doesn't really care to play. I mean, he's proven himself on that front. So whether he's 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the world, I mean, he probably doesn't want to, fall too far out of the top 5, because then you start to get tougher first round opponents in tournaments and Grand Slams. But I just don't think it matters. So I would beg Novak's fans not to obsess over that and just enjoy this tournament. And I do think the fact that Medvedev is not there, and Rublev and Khachanov, unfortunately, I think that's going to kind of fade as soon as the tournament gets underway. I've seen this time and time again where the biggest of controversies just fall by the wayside as people dial into the action.
Yeah, I think that's true. I do think that Medvedev is going to do some big things at Wimbledon at some point in his career. I think he's just figuring out the return, one step away from being a massive contender at Wimbledon. So I think that's significant, but I agree with you from a storyline perspective. I think some players will have a built-in excuse, that I think will be in their head. I think those are mentally weaker players, but I do think the fact that there are no rankings points is going to give certain players an escape valve in their mentality when it comes to how hard they're competing. Will that be a problem with Djokovic and Nadal? I think not at all. They're gunning for history. They are they understand, I guess, what their goals are for Wimbledon and how significant it is. But do I think Riley Opelka can be out there and something trickles into his brain that says screw it? Yes, I do think that could happen.
He's already called it an exhibition. That was the name that popped into my head immediately when you said that.
There
it's
you
interesting,
go.
given someone who has all the tools to win Wimbledon. I mean, he's got, but so we'll see. I mean, this gets to the whole thing about what they think, what they feel, how they say it. And the thing I love about covering a sport, it doesn't matter. It's how they perform. And so we watch the matches. Like you said, you're so right, Amy. The action will melt away the off-court dialogue that's occurred around points and some horrible political things and war and all of that.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, Francisco Cerundolo, I just realized as I was going through my checklist, I didn't mention Nadal's first round opponent, so we'll end on this. He's one of the highest, I got to say, right? I think he's one of the higher ranked players you could draw in terms of the unseededs, because I think he's in the top 40, mainly because of the Miami run, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll check this in a moment. But he's got a big forehand. Joel, do you have any thoughts on Francisco Cerundolo?
Oh, again, I think, yeah, but again, I just think that's a big ask for him. This one will likely be on center court, and taking on Nadal, and Nadal swarming and moving and running. And again, I don't know what's his approach to beating Nadal's. I don't think he's that big a server.
No.
So
actually, it's more of a get me in.
Okay, so you need those. You need some of those free points against Nadal. You need to do that. You need a lot of taking the racket out of his hand. So Nadal is going to look at and say, "Okay, I'm going to take your measure. I'm going to respect you, and we're going to joust for an hour, a couple hours."
I see that one as very similar to Novak's first round match, and I'm already looking ahead to Query. But we also don't know about Rafa's health, so it'll be a good first round match for Novak to look at his mentality, and it'll be a good first round match for Rafa to look at his health.
Absolutely. Cerundolo, just to cover bases, 42 in the world. So it is indeed one of the higher ranked players you can draw as a seeded player in the first round, but it's not his best surface. There are definitely some players who could have been more disastrous to draw, if we will put it that way. Looking forward to Wimbledon 2022, We will have coverage here on 3. That'll do it for this episode. Remember, we're available on all podcast platforms. We appreciate it if you leave a rating and a review on Apple. And if you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. We will see you next time on the next episode of 3.